The scent of freshly baked bread and sizzling butter filled the air as the La Maison Étoilée buzzed with life. This wasn't just any restaurant. It was the finest dining establishment in the city, a place where the elite gathered to taste culinary perfection. And standing in the center of it all, barking orders in his crisp white chef's coat, was Chef Damien Leclerc, the man who ran this kitchen like a king ruling his empire. Outside the grand double doors of La Maison Étoilée, a homeless man stood shivering in the cold. His clothes were torn, his hands were rough and calloused, his beard unkempt and wild. But the thing that stood out the most? His eyes. They weren't the eyes of an ordinary homeless man. They held something deeper: wisdom, experience, and a past he never spoke of. His name was Henry. As he stared through the window, watching waiters gracefully serve dishes worth more than he had seen in years, his stomach growled. Desperate, he took a deep breath and stepped inside. The moment Henry entered, the entire room fell silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. The waiters paused mid-step. Conversations froze. A homeless man standing in the most luxurious restaurant in town? It was unheard of. Within seconds, Chef Damien stormed out of the kitchen, his eyes burning with rage. "What the hell is this?" he hissed, scanning the homeless man up and down. Henry swallowed, suddenly aware of how out of place he was. I just need some food," he said, his voice hoarse from hunger. The guests exchanged disgusted glances. A woman at the bar clutched her pearls. Damien laughed coldly. "Food? This isn't a soup kitchen, old man." Henry hesitated. "I can pay. I just need a meal." Damien's smirk widened. He stepped closer, towering over Henry, his voice dripping with mockery. "Oh, you can pay? With what? Lint from your pockets?" Laughter erupted from a few guests, emboldened by the chef's words. Henry's face burned with shame. But before he could speak again, Damien grabbed him by the collar and shoved him toward the door. "Get out, and don't come back." With one final push, Henry stumbled onto the cold pavement outside. The door slammed shut behind him. The warmth of the restaurant was gone, and he was back where he had started, on the streets, forgotten, alone. As he sat on the curb, rubbing his hands together for warmth, Henry's mind wasn't filled with self-pity. It was filled with rage, not at the humiliation, not at the cold, but at Chef Damien. Because if only Damien knew who he had just thrown out. If only he remembered. Henry let out a slow breath, his fists tightening. They all forgot. But soon, they would remember. Henry sat in the freezing night air, his breath visible in the dim glow of the streetlights. The humiliation burned in his chest, but it wasn't the first time he had been thrown away. Not by society, not by strangers, but by the very world he once ruled. He ran his fingers over his worn-out coat, feeling something buried deep in the pocket. A small, crumpled photograph. He unfolded it carefully, revealing an old newspaper clipping. Faded, but still legible. Chef Henry Beaumont, the king of French cuisine. It was, from years ago, back when Henry wasn't just a man begging for food. He was the best chef in the country. There was a time when Henry Beaumont was a name that commanded respect in every kitchen. His restaurant, Le Papillon d'Or, held 3 Michelin stars, and people traveled from all over the world just to taste his food. His dishes were legendary, his flavors unmatched. But most importantly, he was Damien Leclerc's mentor. That's right. The man who had humiliated him tonight. The man who had laughed at him, shoved him, thrown him onto the street. Henry was the one who had made him. But Damien wasn't always like this. He was once just a young, eager apprentice, desperate to prove himself. Henry had taken him under his wing, taught him everything he knew, helped him rise to the top. So why was Henry out here in the cold while Damien basked in luxury? Because Henry's empire had crumbled overnight. Years ago, Henry's restaurant was at its peak. It was the heart of the city's fine dining scene, packed every night with celebrities, billionaires, and critics alike. But behind the scenes, someone was working to destroy him. Damien. Henry had never seen it coming. Damien, his most trusted apprentice, had slowly gained influence in the kitchen, turning the staff against him. He planted rumors that Henry had lost his touch, that he had grown too old, too slow, too weak. Then, the real betrayal happened. One night, inspectors from the health department raided Le Papillon d'Or. They found planted evidence of expired ingredients, dirty kitchens, fake violations, and, just like that, Henry lost everything. His restaurant, his career, his name, and who was there to take his place? Damien Leclerc. Henry clenched the newspaper in his hand. For years, he had told himself that revenge wasn't worth it, that the past was gone, and there was no point in fighting ghosts. But tonight changed everything. Damien had forgotten who he had thrown onto the streets. He had forgotten the man who built him. But soon, he would remember. Henry didn't just want food anymore. He wanted justice. The cold wind bit at Henry's skin, but he barely felt it. His mind was burning. He had spent years trying to forget the past, convincing himself that revenge was pointless. But tonight, everything changed. His apprentice, the man he had once trained like a son, had not only stolen his legacy, but had humiliated him in the very industry he once ruled. Damien Leclerc thought Henry was just another homeless man. He had no idea what was coming. Henry needed a plan. He had no money, no kitchen, no connections, but he had something far more powerful: skill. Henry sat on the curb, deep in thought, when he heard a voice. "You look like a man with a lot on his mind." He turned. A young woman stood there, her sharp green eyes watching him closely. She was wearing a chef's uniform, stained with flour, grease, and the unmistakable exhaustion of someone who had spent hours in a kitchen. "I saw what happened back there," she said. Henry frowned. "Who are you?" The woman crossed her arms. "My name's Emily. I work in that kitchen." Henry raised an eyebrow. "So you're one of Damien's chefs?" Emily let out a bitter laugh. "I'm one of Damien's victims." Emily sat down next to Henry on the curb, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. "Look," she said, "Damien Leclerc might look like a genius to the world, but inside that kitchen, he's a fraud." Henry said nothing, letting her continue. "He takes credit for everything. We do all the work. He just steps in at the last minute, plates the dish, and walks out to applause." Henry clenched his fists. "And nobody questions him?" Emily shook her head. "Why would they? The restaurant is successful. The food is great. No one asks where it really comes from." Henry took a slow breath, processing her words. Damien hadn't just stolen his career. He had built an empire on lies. And suddenly, Henry knew exactly how to destroy him. "You said you work in that kitchen," Henry said. "That means you know his staff, his menu, his weaknesses." Emily hesitated. "What are you getting at?" Henry turned to face her fully, a fire in his eyes that hadn't been there in years. "What if I told you I could take him down?" Emily stared at him, uncertainty flickering across her face. "You? No offense, but you don't exactly look like someone who can bring down a chef at Damien's level." Henry smiled. "That's the thing," he said. "He doesn't even remember who I am." Emily frowned. "Wait, what are you saying?" Henry leaned in. "I trained him." Emily's eyes widened. You're Henry Beaumont?" Henry nodded. Emily sucked in a breath. "I thought you were dead." Henry let out a dry laugh. "Not dead. Just forgotten." Emily stared at him, her mind racing. She had heard rumors. Whispers from old chefs who still remembered the past. Henry Beaumont was once a legend, a master of flavors, a genius in the kitchen. And now he was here, sitting on the street, plotting the downfall of the man who betrayed him. Emily's heart pounded. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Henry smiled. "I need you to get me inside that kitchen." Emily looked at Henry, her mind still struggling to grasp the truth. This man, the homeless man who had been thrown out like trash, was once the most respected chef in the country. And now he wanted revenge. Henry's gaze was steady, focused. "You said you wanted to take Damien down," Emily said. "How do we do it?" A slow smile spread across Henry's face. "Simple," he said. "We beat him in his own kitchen." Emily led Henry through the city streets, weaving through alleys until they reached the back entrance of La Maison Étoilée. The kitchen's delivery door was propped open, crates of fresh ingredients being carried inside. "The staff changes often," Emily whispered. "Damien doesn't keep track of new hires. If I say you're a new dishwasher, no one will question it." Henry nodded. It was a simple plan. A dishwasher was invisible. No one paid attention to them. And once inside, Henry would get his chance. As Henry walked through the back entrance, the scent of garlic, butter, and seared meat filled his nose. For the first time in years, he felt home. But what he saw next made his blood boil. Chefs moved frantically from station to station, preparing dishes from a menu Henry had once written. Damien had stolen everything. Henry clenched his fists, but he forced himself to remain calm. Not yet. Emily nudged him. "Come on," she whispered. "You're officially the new dishwasher." As Henry scrubbed plates at the back of the kitchen, he watched Damien walk in. Nothing had changed. Damien still carried himself like a king, walking past the staff with his nose high in the air. He wore the same smug expression, barking orders without even glancing at the food, the same empty arrogance. And then Damien walked right past Henry, didn't even glance at him, didn't recognize him. Henry had spent years thinking about this man, about the betrayal, about the night he lost everything. And yet, to Damien, Henry was just another nobody. The insult cut deeper than words ever could. Henry exhaled slowly. "Enjoy your throne while you can, Damien," he muttered under his breath. "It won't be yours for much longer." Hours passed, and Henry kept his head down. But he was listening, watching. And then, just before closing, he saw his chance. One of the sous chefs, a young, nervous-looking man, was sweating at the meat station. He looked panicked. Emily whispered to Henry, "That's Matt. He's new. And from the looks of it, he's about to mess up." Henry saw it too. The steak on the grill, overcooked. If Damien saw it, Matt would be finished. Henry acted fast. Before Matt could plate the disaster, Henry moved past him in a blur, grabbed a fresh cut of meat, and took control of the station. Matt's eyes widened. "What are you doing? If Damien sees you—" "Shut up and watch," Henry murmured, flipping the steak in a smooth, precise motion. The grill sizzled perfectly, the heat just right. Henry seasoned from memory, his hands moving as if they had never forgotten. In under 2 minutes, the steak was perfection. He plated it. Clean, elegant, masterful. And just as he stepped back, Damien appeared. Damien stopped in front of the dish, picking up the plate. His eyes scanned it. It was flawless. "Who made this?" Damien demanded. Matt froze. Emily tensed. Henry stayed silent. Finally, Matt gulped and nodded toward Henry. Damien turned toward the dishwasher. His brows furrowed. "You," he scoffed. "A dishwasher? You made this?" Henry wiped his hands on his apron and looked Damien in the eyes. And for the first time in years, His old confidence returned. "Yes," he said. "I did." For a brief moment the kitchen stood still. Damien Leclerc, the great chef, the master of La Maison Étoilée, was staring down at a plate cooked by a dishwasher. The other chefs held their breath. No one spoke. No one dared to move. Then, without a word, Damien picked up his fork. He sliced a perfect bite of steak, speared it onto his fork, and placed it in his mouth. As soon as he did, his chewing slowed. His eyes flickered for a fraction of a second, something almost imperceptible to the others. But Henry saw it. Recognition, memory, a forgotten flavor. The flavor of a time before Damien was famous, before he was a so-called genius, a time when he was just a student learning under Henry Beaumont. Damien set his fork down, slowly, deliberately. "Who taught you to cook like this?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. Henry simply wiped his hands on his apron. "I had a good teacher," he said, keeping his face blank. Damien narrowed his eyes. "You're a dishwasher. Who do you think you are stepping into my kitchen?" The arrogance, the blind ego. Nothing had changed. Henry smiled, a small, knowing smile. "I'm someone who still remembers the real art of cooking," he said. The kitchen was still silent, every chef watching this battle unfold. They had seen many people crumble under Damien's sharp tongue. But this dishwasher was standing his ground. Damien took a slow step closer. "You think you can just walk in here and challenge me?" he said, voice low, venomous. "You're nothing. You don't belong in this kitchen." Henry exhaled. "Funny," he said. "You said those exact words to me once before." Damien blinked. For the first time, something in his expression cracked. A flicker of doubt, recognition, and then a shadow of fear. Henry had no doubt about it now. Damien knew. He just wasn't ready to admit it. Not yet. Before Damien could regain control, Henry spoke one final time. "Tell you what," Henry said, his voice even, confident. "If I'm just a dishwasher, then surely you wouldn't mind a little competition." The other chefs exchanged glances. The sous chefs froze in anticipation. A challenge? Against Damien? Unheard of. Damien let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. "You want to compete with me?" Henry shrugged. "Unless, of course, you're scared." The kitchen erupted in hushed murmurs. No one ever questioned Damien. And yet, here was a dishwasher calling him out. Damien's jaw tightened. His pride was on the line. And Damien Leclerc never backed down. "Fine," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Tomorrow night? Dinner service? You and me? One dish each." He leaned in, eyes locked on Henry. "Loser walks away forever." Henry didn't blink. "Agreed." And with that, the game was on. The next evening, the tension in La Maison Étoilée was electric. Every chef, every waiter, even the dishwashers, were whispering about the impossible event about to take place. A head-to-head competition between Damien Leclerc, the so-called king of French cuisine, and a dishwasher. But the whispers weren't just about the competition, because now a rumor had spread through the kitchen. The dishwasher wasn't just some random street rat. He was Henry Beaumont, the man Damien had betrayed. And tonight Damien would have to face him. Damien stood tall, his pristine white chef's jacket crisp and spotless. Henry, in contrast, wore a simple apron, his sleeves rolled up. No titles, no arrogance, just skill. "One dish, 1 hour?" Damien said, voice sharp. "Our own original recipes. The staff will judge. Blind tasting." Henry nodded, rolling his shoulders. "Let's get started." The timer began. The final battle had begun. Damien moved first, his hands fast and confident. Flames roared. Knives clashed. Ingredients flew. He worked like a man possessed, constructing a dish that looked like art itself. Perfectly cut Wagyu beef, hand-foraged black truffles, a gold leaf garnish. Expensive, luxurious, flawless. He smirked as he plated it. "Good luck topping that," he sneered. Henry didn't reply. He simply breathed in deeply, then closed his eyes. And when he opened them, he moved. Henry didn't reach for luxury. He didn't grab truffles or caviar or gold leaf. Instead, he cooked from memory, from the heart. Butter melted in the pan, sizzling softly. He seared a simple cut of duck breast, skin crisping to a perfect golden brown. He caramelized shallots in red wine, their scent filling the room. He layered flavors, acid, salt, umami, warmth. Each movement was effortless, natural. Because for Henry, cooking wasn't about showing off. It was about telling a story of betrayal, survival, redemption. And as he plated his dish, he already knew the outcome. The two dishes sat side by side on the judging table. Damien's, a stunning masterpiece, luxurious, intimidating, expensive. Henry's humble, simple, yet elegant, a dish of deep, comforting flavors. One by one, the judges took a bite. Damien watched, arms crossed, his face smug. Then they tasted Henry's dish, and everything changed. Silence. Utensils were set down. Then, a murmur. The judges looked at one another, their faces shocked, and finally one of them spoke. I don't understand," the head chef whispered. "Damien's dish is beautiful, but Henry's—" Another chef finished the sentence. "Henry's tastes like home." The decision was unanimous. Henry had won. Damien's face drained of color. He staggered back, unable to comprehend what had just happened. No, this isn't possible," he muttered. "I'm the greatest chef in this city." Henry stepped forward. "No," he said simply. "You're just a man who stole his way to the top." Damien's chest heaved with rage, but there was nothing left for him to say. He had lost, and everyone in the room knew it. The other chefs surrounded Henry, offering their respect. Some shook his hand, some clapped his back. Even the judges, chefs who once idolized Damien, now looked at Henry with awe. And then, a voice spoke up. "Chef Beaumont." Henry turned. It was the restaurant's owner. "Would you consider taking over as head chef?" A hush fell over the room. Henry took a long breath. "No," he said, shaking his head. Gasps. Even Damien looked shocked. But then Henry smiled. "I don't want to run someone else's restaurant." He turned to Emily. "But I think it's time to open my own again." Emily's eyes widened. "You mean—" Henry nodded. "Le Papillon d'Or is coming back." That night, Damien Leclerc walked out of his own kitchen for the last time. His reputation in ruins. His empire shattered. And Henry? Henry didn't just reclaim his name. He reclaimed his passion. As he stepped out into the night, the wind was still cold. But this time, he wasn't just another man on the street. He was Henry Beaumont. And the world would never forget his name again.